Hello guys, what is up? Cobra Axis and Allies here. Today I'm showing you, or bringing to you, another video of my 1914 map, and I've been working pretty hard on this thing, and we have been hard at work on the southern hemisphere, so everything below the bottom half of the map. So basically, yeah, so I've pretty much completely scrapped all of the African, South American, and Australian continents and redone the entirety of them all. So I guess we'll start over here at South America. Now, as you can see, there's been mostly some changes that just have come to borders being a little more kind of what's it called? They're more continuous. They are all kind of the same overall width now, so there's no more I guess temporary borders. Everything's kind of been solidified. One major thing is you'll see there's a bunch more territories down here in South America. It might remind you of Global 36, but also with the addition of Chile as a pretty uh, territory intense nation down here, kind of on par with the other ABC nations. And that's mainly because if Germany decides to align Chile, they can kind of wage a little bit more dynamic of a war between the South American nations down here. So yeah, I really like this overall change, and I really like Chile here with its new changes. And overall, you're gonna see a lot more territories on this map, but it's not going to make the game more complex. You know, this game is again simple and fast-paced, but these extra territories, they add to the depth if you so choose to activate some of these nations down here. Africa is probably one of my favorite changes. You know, in out of box 1914, Africa is it's kind of what it was in real life. It was just a pushover, though the Germans held out down here in southeast Africa. They were pretty much kind of a backwater, and there wasn't a lot of action down here. It was pretty intense and a movement heavy war that happened down here, but it didn't last too long because of the infantry. But I have definitely turned this Africa into something that I would almost, I feel like there's going to be so much more fun in Africa than even in Europe, where, Europe's a lot of tug and pull, where you send more infantry in here and then they send more infantry in there. But nowadays, I mean, with Africa, there's so many more territories that I can see just a ton of movement and fighting all over the place. So you can see up here in North Africa, um, we've got a lot of we've got some Spanish states here, but a big thing you might notice with these two, Algeria and Tripolitania, one major reason I added these kind of Saharan kind of southern states down here is mostly because to represent where major rebellions started. Because during the war, a lot of Saharan kind of pro-Ottoman Muslim forces were attacking Italian and French-controlled Algeria and Tripolitania. So that'll definitely be able to be represented, and it'll kind of be more dynamic. Overall, Africa is that's kind of the name of the game now. It's more dynamic. There's going to be, instead of just spawning an infantry in a massive territory of Algeria, there'll be a little bit more movement, where France might come down here and deploy some guys to Algeria, but the rebels will start running around all over the place and taking over other territories. You can see here, this is another one of my favorite changes because there is a lot of action across the Suez Canal and the Sinai Desert. So you can see now the Sinai Desert is its own little kind of territory here. Now, one major reason for this is because of the fact that I'm going to be doing away with the 1914 rules of any combat is considered one round of combat. Instead, I'm going to be taking up kind of the historical board gaming's rule set, where it'll just be 6 infantry would represent a trench, fortified area, meaning that territories will be able to be taken a little faster in this game. meaning that more territories is a little bit better. Because you think of the original game where you had Transjordan pretty much being this entire peninsula, because it would take, or not peninsula, but coastline, because the British could, occupy this coastline, and then they would be fighting there in this trench warfare for a really long time. But in this sense, because say the Ottomans might not be able to put 6th Infantry down here, it gives them a little leeway for the British to come through Macon and then the Seraphet of Hejaz, and then through Transjordan. But yeah, so basically we've got the Sinai Desert, which is pretty cool. There's some cool stories about that too, where the Ottomans marched through that with German help providing supply lines, which you could kind of do, take it over and then build a rail link through it. Which also leads for some congestion of the Suez Canal, where the Ottomans can come through here and contest this side of the canal, with the British on the other side, meaning that the canal will be impassable for both sides, because each side would be able to shoot up each other's ships and everything. So, as you can see, the Mediterranean's a little work in progress. I want to add a few more sea zones, mainly so that there's a southern route and a northern route. And that also kind of came from I moved Africa down, and funnily enough, like I basically reworked Africa to make the Mediterranean bigger, but I was able to pretty much I made Africa a little bit less squished, and I made it way cooler overall, and and kind of the Mediterranean's now the side project of the show, but yeah, so over here I didn't add money to Ethiopia. That'll be worth 1. You can see we got the Sahara, impassable. I did add these zones to it too, so that you won't be able to just say with a Zeppelin, maybe, you wouldn't be able to fly in through here, count this as one territory, and then fly out the other side, because it is a pretty big desert. We got just a little British colonial map I saw marked this desert in Egypt as the Great Sand Sea, which I thought was kind of just a cool little thing to add. So I guess we'll start over here for now. You can see still a work in progress. I don't have the roundel in Liberia yet. But I guess one thing that's kind of dynamic is the fact that France doesn't have a major link here by land to get to sub-Saharan Africa, which I think is going to be pretty cool, because the fact that yes, France will just be able to kind of send a transport over here, but it means naval assets that they can't use. And they could choose to invade Spanish Sahara, which, I mean, it isn't that important to have this land link here, but it could be an option. So it's kind of like little dynamic things about that. Like the Spanish Sahara, even though it's not worth anything, is a tactical advantage to own that, because you have a link to this other side here. We've just got these little small states along the coast here. I really wanted to just add as much as I could to just kind of show off overall the colonial influence on the world, just to kind of show the fact that these 7 or so empires really ruled the entire world. But so starting out here with the German colonies, because they will be the major kind of the action areas of this game. Togoland will probably fall pretty fast. It isn't really worth much anyways, but there'll be an infantry there, and maybe they'll be able to link up with the Cameroon forces. In Cameroon, they have a pretty good chance at fighting off. They really aren't going to be supplied that much, and most of these territories will only have an infantry and maybe a militia or a little bit more, depending on the troop counts that I find. But Cameroon has a pretty good chance of holding out for a bit, because they have all jungle territories, so their infantry will get first strike on defense. Plus, they have the ability to fall back here to the kind of inland areas. So if a British naval assault comes, they'll be able to kind of get out of there if they don't want to pick that fight. And that's a big thing of this game, the fact that now the Germans won't just sit here or march through the huge Belgian Congo that's vast and only takes 1 turn to pass. But they'll be able to actually move around in these territories. It'll be like a conquest. The British can march in here, but the Germans might move in here, and yeah, so it'll definitely be kind of a more dynamic fight overall. Another huge thing is the fact that I think the Belgian Congo is one of the biggest changes in the sense of gameplay, because the majority of the time it would be basically the Germans would just move over a little bit. So, turn one, Germany would move their infantry over and take these guys, move them, take over the entirety of the Belgian Congo. And I don't know if you've ever seen this before, and you can kind of see with this map, but if people have taken kind of a map of the Belgian Congo and put it on top of Europe, and it's pretty much the same size as Europe. So, considering that possibly around 10,000, maybe 6,000 guys marching in and taking over the entirety of this land and enforcing it is kind of strange. And the fact that in 1 year they would be able to or in a couple months, just walk across this entire jungle. Yeah, so overall this is going to be a little more dynamic. Belgium won't have a ton of forces down here. The more important parts down here will have a good infantry complement, though, which of course will most likely be aligned to France on turn one when Germany invades. So, yeah, but it kind of begs the question. It'd be kind of cool to see places like Belgium and maybe Portugal actually be playable nations in this game, and I could totally see someone house ruling that in. But yeah, so next up is kind of what I would call the capital of German Africa here, especially in this game, which is Southwest Africa, or Southeast Africa. Yeah, so you can see we've got the city of Tanga here on the coast, and that was a pretty major battle, the Battle of the Bees, if any of you have heard of it before. We've got some small little islands, and these are definitely a lot bigger than they would be in real life, but, I just decided, why not, a little bit more dynamic, somewhere that the Germans might be able to just, run into, or the British could come in and occupy these islands to then, force a mainland invasion. We got Zanzibar right here, which I ended up making a pro-German state, because even though it was under British control, there wasn't really any military complement there, and a few years earlier, Zanzibar had tried. They really didn't have good relations with the British. So, and beforehand, it was mainly because they were diplomatically kind of aligned to Germany, but then in a treaty, they were kind of handed over to the British. So, the Zanzibar people were not really that fond of the British. So, they have the option of joining the fight. Isn't any infantry there? I might add one just for the Germans to pick up, because why not? It's one infantry, it's not going to tip the balance of the entire game. But you can see we've got some jungle for the Germans to kind of fight in and hold back the British forces coming up from Zimbabwe. Tambora, which isn't jungle, but it's not a coastal territory, so a place where the Germans can fall back. You can also see a lot of rivers here. Now, the Germans will get a monitor representing their little Lake Tanganyika fleet. So that will definitely be Germany's greatest asset of this, of down here. Like, overall, Germany will probably only have about 6-ish infantry in the whole of Africa. So having that monitor there will be a huge, like, asset to them in terms of making any sort of serious attacks, and the fact that these rivers run all over the place. So, yeah. Next up, we've got the, I guess, the Portuguese colonies, and these are definitely able to be attacked more dynamically too, with the Germans being able to march into Mozambique. And kind of a cool thing is the fact that they can march in here and take this money, and yes, they would have to conjure up some forces to actually take out the Portuguese, but that's a dollar that the British are now going to have to move in to Sofala, or if the British, it might be a good move if the British marched up here to Zimbabwe, and then the Germans retreated and took out the forces in Mozambique, and then the British would still be a turn away from getting to them, and then maybe even run over this river here. Yeah, so I like that. Madagascar, just not anything to mention about that. Next up, we've got Southwest Africa, which was definitely the most, though Southeast Africa was, it held out for the longest, and it did rely on a lot of native fighters. Southwest Africa was definitely the most militarily, I guess, important to the Germans in the beginning of the war, where there was the most artillery and German infantry stationed in Southwest Africa. So you can see here it is with the British mainly getting forces placed in South Africa, it'll definitely be kind of a push southward, where we've got kind of this loop around that they would probably have to do. And there is, being $2, a good amount of money down here, so the Germans might want to try to defend this. And the Germans, I know, they get I think some kind of auxiliary or convoy raider up here that represents their Cameroon fleet, and also a cruiser over here to represent their South African fleet. So they could converge down here, and the British don't have a large naval presence, so Germany could win the small naval engagement that could happen down here in Africa, definitely tying up stuff like the French or even Italian naval forces around the African coast. Yeah, so overall, I really think Africa is going to be a really fun and dynamic playing area. Over here, I don't know why that desert isn't showing through that well, but we've got, I'm not sure if I touched on this too much last time, but it's basically just a more dynamic version of the Arabian Peninsula, where we've got some little Ottoman vassals out here in the deserts. All these Arabian territories, though not worth anything, will have neutral infantry and cavalry, just representing tribes and such that would fight any kind of invaders. And though in this configuration here in the beginning of the game, they aren't really going to do much, except for block off, say, this territory from the Ottomans to actually reinforce. They will mainly kind of come into play if some random events start tipping the favor in the British hands, where some uprisings and such will happen to the Ottomans. So that'll definitely be a bigger fight down here that might divert some Ottoman forces. And then lastly, for this video, we are just going to look at Australia, and New Zealand here. I ended up changing up Australia mainly because I didn't like the shape of it or the size, and you can see now it's definitely a lot bigger, and I really like that. I also like the added territories and the fact that you can't just walk from this side to this side, just straight through the center. It's a vast territory, and there will be a rail link that travels from Victoria over to Western Australia, so that'll definitely be a kind of good idea for the British to send some transports over to Western Australia here, maybe down from India, and then Britain can recruit some infantry with these territories here worth $1, and then rail them over to Western Australia to then send them off to possibly Africa or Gallipoli. Could also be a good idea, or not. Lastly, we just have New Zealand, which I split into 2 islands just because I thought it would just be a little better. But yeah, overall, that is the southern hemisphere of Earth, and I really like it, and I hope you guys do, especially with Africa being kind of the namesake of this game in terms of extra territorial conflicts out here. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this really quick look into my 1914 map again, and I hope to see you guys again in the next video. Cobra, out.